it's a very difficult problem to solve. It's one that essentially is a giant prisoner's dilemma kind of problem. So a prisoner's dilemma is where it's in your interest, it's in the interest, let's say, of an individual prisoner to confess to a crime, to get a lighter sentence and implicate others in the prison, but collectively they'll all do better if none of them confess. And this is a similar sort of situation where, individually, at least for a short term, we might see it as rational to not take the action, to benefit from the cheapest energy, or to continue to eat meat that involves high emissions. But collectively, we will all be better off if we switch to clean energy, if we dramatically reduce consumption of meat from ruminant animals, and take other steps to at least slow climate change. I don't think we can anymore talk about preventing climate change. Climate change is already upon us. What we can aim at doing is to prevent it becoming absolutely catastrophic. And that's what, back in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, 197 nations pledged to do, including, of course, Australia and the United States under Ronald Reagan, although recent, more Republican presidents obviously have not gone along with that. But they pledged to avoid what they call dangerous anthropogenic climate change. And we need to follow through with that. We need to follow through at every level. I think that if we ask what are our responsibilities as citizens, then we have dual responsibilities. We have the responsibility to be active citizens and to pressure our governments as far as we possibly can to treat this as a serious emergency issue. And in that respect, I greatly admire Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish activist who has brought that message to world leaders, done so in a very sincere and intense manner, accused them of destroying her future as a young person. And I think we need to reinforce that message at all generations. And it's not only the future of young people alive today, but of course, it's future generations who will live on this planet. And for that matter, it's also non-human animals. We'll be talking about them more specifically in a moment. But clearly, climate change is going to cause a huge wave of extinctions where animals cannot go somewhere else to maintain the kind of climate that they're in. In Australia, we could think, for example, about our alpine species. There are species that live only in the alpine areas where there's snow, and they need that to survive. They can't migrate higher up the mountains as they might be able to do in some countries when climate changes and it gets warmer, because we don't have high mountains. So that's one example of a whole ecosystem that is likely to become extinct. And of course, we're already seeing the coral reefs being severely damaged through climate change. That's a precious ecosystem that we have been blessed with having a remarkable Great Barrier Reef and other coral reefs. It's going to be very difficult to save them at all. I think we'll need very drastic action. So as citizens, we need to campaign about that and to try to make that an important political issue. We also need to set examples ourselves. A lot of people say, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. It makes no difference what I do. But in fact, we are not only affecting the emissions that we ourselves put out, depending on how we live, what we drive, what we do, but we're also setting examples for others. And again, it's like what I was talking about in terms of changing the culture with regard to giving. We need to change the culture with regard to living as lightly on the planet as we can, and with doing things like putting solar panels on our roof, with trying to avoid driving where we can with using public transport or walking or riding a bike, or if we are driving, using an electric vehicle or a hybrid, trying to fly less. All of those things, I think, are things that we should be thinking about doing. And maybe one blessing of this pandemic is that surely we've learned that we can now conduct lots of meetings like we're conducting this one over Zoom. And I'm hoping that businesses will learn this lesson, and they'll save themselves some money as well as reducing their greenhouse gas emissions by not flying people around the country or internationally to attend meetings that can be just as effectively held online. So I think those are all things that we need to think about. But of course, the role of investment is important too, and that's why it's great that Australian Ethical has taken this stance for a very long time. At Princeton, I've been supporting ethics efforts for Princeton to divest from the fossil fuels. Princeton has a sort of $20 billion endowment, and it's not divested from fossil fuels. We think it should. The university is doing some things. It's itself trying to become carbon neutral by 2040, I think, or 2045 was the date that was set. I've been on a committee looking at that. So those things are good, and we're doing research into. Princeton has a fusion laboratory, which would be a great clean energy if we ever got there. Some people think it will, never will. Some people think it might, and we have other research going on into clean energy. So there are good things that universities can do. But it's going to take a lot of effort, and sort of divesting from fossil fuels, making people see that they're unacceptable in the way that a lot of people now see that tobacco is unacceptable, or that the manufacture of drugs like OxyContin, which have caused such widespread addiction, is unacceptable. I think we need to see that about the fossil fuel industry as well.